It all started on Friday the 13th of September 1957, when a little boy drowned in Crystal Lake. It was a tragedy that shook the community, one his mother Pamela never really let go. She worked at the Crystal Lake summer camp, you see, and she blamed her son's death on the camp counsellors who were too busy doing NC-17 activities in the cabins to watch her precious boy. 22 years later, when the camp is due to be reopened, Pamela enacts a bloody massacre of the camp's new counsellors to ensure no other child has to die like Jason did. Jason did die, right? The sole survivor of Pamela's rampage, the counsellor Alice, tried to return to a normal life after watching her friends die and being forced to decapitate Pamela. But she would soon learn that Jason never drowned in that lake. He'd survived, living and growing up on his own in the woods outside Camp Crystal Lake, and he wanted revenge for his mother's death. He heard her voice in his head, "Kill for mother," and kill he did. And thus began Jason Voorhees' reign of terror. Innocent or guilty, young or old, it did not matter. They were trespassers, and Jason ensured that they would never trespass anywhere ever again. Not even death would stop him from killing. Tommy Jarvis put him in the ground, but a bolt of lightning saw him rise from the dead as a revenant, which only increased his legendary strength and durability. But one fateful night, as Jason was maintaining the shrine he'd made from his mother's severed head, he saw a dark fog bubbling from the depths of Crystal Lake. It wormed into his ramshackle home, its cold tendrils clawing at his mask and pulling him into a world he did not recognize. A world of blood and bone and screams and pain. And thus the entity claimed Jason Voorhees, the Slasher, for its own. Wait, hang on a minute. That's not how this story goes. This is how I expected Jason's lore integration DBD to go, but the reality, for better or worse, is very different. In fact, this can't be how the story goes, because DBD only has the rights to some elements of Jason. There's a reason why this release is called Dead by Daylight X Jason and not DBD X Friday the 13th after all. I'll go into more details in a bit, but the point for now is that DBD's Jason differs in many important ways from his presentation in historic Friday the 13th media. New stuff has been added, and old stuff is conspicuously absent in places. In today's video, we're going to be going through DBD's Jason release with a nit comb, to get the measure of all these differences, to see if Jason's integration into the fog was able to be successful despite all the legal obstacles that stopped him coming to the fog altogether for such a long time. Welcome, friends and foes, survivors and killers, to Jason, finally here in Dead by Daylight. Let's start with the lore and the story that we actually got for Jason, not the shit I just made up for a laugh. In the world of Dead by Daylight, we catch up with Jason in the woods around Greenville, the hometown of Sable, Michaela and Julian, and the regular haunt of the unknown. Jason is staying in the forest, the language implying that he doesn't permanently live there. This is just another Jason road trip, like the one he took to Manhattan, or, space. He stumbles upon a tent in the misty woods, hearing a commotion inside. There's clearly somebody in there, but as he prepares for an attack, he realizes that whatever this is, it's no normal camper. He rips open the tent to find a misshapen, warped thing resembling but doing a pretty poor impression of a human, its identity unknown to Jason. It murmurs in a strange, unfamiliar voice, "Can you help me find my cat?" and lunges for Jason with its axe before he can reply. If he replied, he doesn't tend to say things. Jason snaps its neck effortlessly, stabs it with his machete, but the creature continues. It keeps on living, or whatever it does that resembles living. It sinks hungry tendrils into Jason's body, cuts into his muscles to the bone, and oozes a mysterious pink liquid into Jason's masked face. Eventually, Jason decapitated it with a hacksaw, his raw, brutal strength overpowering whatever the hell that was as it flops uselessly to the forest floor. But as Jason soon learns, this is a thing that will not die. As Jason turns his back, the unknown monster attacks him from behind. Not even removing its head was enough to put it down. Jason took to smashing its body against a tree, over and over again with sheer inhuman force, until nothing remained but two legs and a giant pile of splattered gore. The awful remains start to twitch as a dark fog coils around Jason's feet, the mist of the woods taking on an unnatural blackness. Jason charges through the dark as the air fills with screams and the sounds of running feet, only to see a young, olive-skinned woman in a scarf standing opposite him. He silences her scream with a single swipe of his machete, and thus the entity claims Jason Voorhees for its own. At last. Okay, so let's dispense with the pretenses and whatnot. Jason lives in the Greenville woods and fights the fucking unknown. This is so damn cool. We've seen rogue killers appearing in other people's stories before. Even licensed ones. He only appears in Rebecca Chambers' lore, for example. But this is the first time we've seen killers clash and come to blows directly. It's pretty on brand for Jason. Turn up in crossover media and immediately pick a fight with a Dead by Daylight killer. There's a whole movie about that. The fact that Unknown was in a tent when there was already signs of a struggle inside indicates that Jason's attack took place directly after that Unknown teaser that we all remember so fondly. And Greenville isn't the only place in the world of Dead by Daylight where Jason has paid a visit. The perk description for Scared to Death implies that Jason was active in the Ormond area in Canada before arriving in Greenville, which is a nice touch until you read the second issue of the Legion comic and then realise it becomes a much, much nicer touch. Okay, I'm putting on my Balenciaga tinfoil hat for this one. Let's have some fun. In the Legion comic, it is implied that the Black Veil was active in Ormond long before the Legion was formed, sacrificing 13 people in an engineered mine collapse. Julie's commentary on the topic implies this is the result of the Black Veil. But what's the Black Veil doing in Ormond? Why are they ritually sacrificing people in, of all places, Ormond, Alberta? Obviously, we know that the Legion is going to come from Ormond later, but the Black Veil doesn't know this. At least presumably. Something must have drawn them there earlier than the 1990s when the Legion was active. The only other thing we know was active in Ormond before the Legion was Jason. So again, tinfoil hat time. Maybe Jason is the reason that the Black Veil was sacrificing people in Ormond. Specifically, 13 people. They've done experiments with mass sacrifices at places where atrocities have happened before. That's what the Garden of Joy experiment was all about, that created the dredge. So maybe they sacrificed all those people in Ormond to try to summon him, or access an overlap that his slaughter in Ormond created. In the casting of Frank Stone, Augustine Lieber's plan was to recreate a historic massacre at a site where great suffering had already occurred, the Cedar Steel Plant. And that plan did succeed, creating an overlap between the entity's realm and our world that allowed Frank Stone to be taken by the entity. By mass sacrificing people at a site where Jason has already killed tons of innocent victims, the Black Veil could be doing the same thing, turning the location of Jason's killing spree into a full-blown rift between realities. This theory gets even more compelling once you realise the other place Jason's been is Greenville, another location where an overlap in the entity's realm existed, and where the Black Veil was actively surveilling through the OSS in Unknown's lore. It is my prevailing theory, therefore, that the Black Veil has effectively been following Jason around as he goes on killing sprees across North America, potentially trying to figure out what he is, use his massacres as origin points for further overlaps, or even to capture him. Given how steeped our Jason's lore is in DBD's original universe, we could maybe see a tome someday that goes into more detail on this. Worth noting, we don't know which killer is going to get the lore for Tome 24, but I'm looking forward to finding out. This integration between Jason and DBD's own organic world feels like it was made for me. They say restrictions breed creativity, and DBD's character writing team have definitely shown that creativity. I wish more licensed killers were integrated this smoothly. Jason's not quite on the Ghostface or Alan Wake level of successful integration in DBD, but he does come pretty close. However, if restrictions breed creativity, the same kind of goes the other way. The level of creativity they've put into Jason's integration makes the stuff that's absent all the more noticeable. Since his backstory intentionally obfuscates elements of Jason's history like Pamela and Camp Crystal Lake, the most obvious references to individual Friday the 13th movie moments can be found in Jason's add-ons. Normally, a licensed killer's add-ons provide nice references and shoutouts to iconic moments or objects in that character's history. Chucky, for example, has add-ons that reference iconic kills throughout the series, like rat poison, a pile of nails, and a plastic bag that suffocated one poor victim. Or Pinhead has objects borrowed from other Cenobites in his gash, like Butterball, Deep Throat, and the Engineer. Jason's add-ons are all cut from a similar cloth to Chucky's. Each and every one is a prop used in one of Jason's inventive kills from one of the movies. Well, there's one exception. The sleeping bag, for example, is from a very memorable kill in New Blood, where Jason beats someone to death against a tree by swinging the sleeping bag into it over and over again, in a kill so iconic it even got immortalised in Friday the 13th the game. I think Dirty Money might be the funniest reference here. In Jason Lives, a character attempts to bribe Jason with a few $20 bills and an American Express card, as if an undead zombie killing machine has any use for your pocket change. But the cheekiest reference by far is the iridescent boat motor, because that's a reference to Tommy and Megan finally beating Jason and trapping him at the bottom of the lake at the end of Jason Lives. All of his add-ons reference him killing other people, except the eerie boat motor that references other people killing him. I've got to admit, that has got some sauce. If you've got a favourite kill from the Friday franchise, odds are there's an add-on that references it, and these are the most oblique references that we have to specific moments in the series, so they're nice to look back on, especially when you're doing the Leonardo point at your screen during a rewatch, because hey, there's that DBD add-on, while Jason's turning some poor fucker inside out or something. Speaking of brutal and inventive kills, it's time I think to talk about Jason's power. This power was always going to be a point of contention. Jason's identity as a character is usually focused on his raw, incredible, ridiculous strength, especially in the post-Jason Lives zombie Jason era. He's defined by being this mighty, unassailable force of violence who can maybe be slowed down but can't ever be killed. And this is an identity that was always going to struggle to make it into Dead by Daylight because every killer is like that. Not just in gameplay itself, but even canonically in the lore. For killers who are just normal people like Legion and Clown, the entity basically gives them steroids to turn them into unstoppable monsters. This meant that what Jason would actually do once he got here was a little ambiguous. Was he just going to be a super M1 killer? Were we just in for End Fury the power? Ironically, the reworked Myers power Slaughtering Strike might have been better suited to Jason than it ever was to Myers. But I'll say this. The power that we got definitely feels appropriate for Jason while still keeping up with the stuff needed for a modern killer's power design. The map coverage feels exactly like it should for Jason. Throughout the Friday the 13th movies, Jason regularly turned up exactly wherever he wanted to or needed to be to let the action happen with zero diegetic explanation. Off-screen teleportation was one of the many slasher tropes Jason codified, and DBD's version of it through the Omniscient Evil system is a super smooth way of implementing that. When I was designing my power for Potential and Problems Friday the 13th, I was scratching my head as to how to make Jason's off-screen teleportation work properly. You know, just appearing from place to place was going to feel wrong. But between shrouding the map in mist and making Jason himself invisible for a while, behaviour kind of cut the Gordian knot. You're always off-screen if nobody can see you. It allows Jason to do his Jason thing, appearing from unexpected places and immediately scare and threaten you in a way that fits nicely into DBD's game flow. And let me just gush about the throwing spikes for a moment, because I wanted DBD to have a displacement projectile power for years. Ever since Wesker proved that a power throwing survivors around like that could actually be like a thing they could technically do. I've been sitting on a Potential and Problems video for multiple years now, with exactly that principle behind the power concept, and I'm so happy to see it come to DBD through the throwing spike system. From a gameplay perspective, I absolutely love this. A single, narrow projectile isn't terribly new to DBD. Deathslinger has been around since 2020, but the displacement angle is again something I've wanted for years, and the way Jason's power works treats it as more than just a gimmick. You can nail collateral damage hits with this, which makes hit-taking pretty awkward against this guy, which would normally be a problem for a killer with only one shot. You can knock people out of range of flashlight and pallet saves, which is a really handy tool given how powerful those are in the current meta. Nailing somebody a wall and then grabbing them gives you a built-in Lightborn effect, kind of like Wesker's grab does, and the spear is incredibly precise, has no range cap, and flies pretty much straight, meaning you have the precision of Deathslinger with the cross-map power of Huntress. What a beautiful combination! Mechanically, I like the throwing spikes a lot, and thematically they're pretty successful too. While he does tend to prefer taking care of business up close, Jason is no stranger to ranged weapons. In various movie installments, he's used a bow and arrow, shot people with a harpoon gun, hurled hatchets, especially in the remake, and he's even thrown a fire axe before, unlike a certain other Landversary killer we could mention. Spears are also a Friday the 13th staple, both like actual factual spears, but also improvised spears, like the fence post he wields in Jason Lives. So Jason likes throwing shit, he likes spears, and he likes improvised weapons, so using improvised spears that he throws at people just fits nicely, especially since the displacement further emphasises Jason's raw brute strength. And I just adore that the scrap pile spikes are lots of different random sharp objects that Jason's picked up and thought, yeah, I can make this work. Obviously, the hook spikes and scrap spikes are somewhat mechanically different. Only the hook spikes can truly impale survivors, but when you take a spike from a scrap pile, it can be any one of a number of different objects. It's purely cosmetic, but something that they didn't need to do. It adds a little bit of sauce to Jason, and it makes the improvised weapon idea feel a little bit more authentic. I love it, especially with his unique hooks that resemble the ramshackle house he lives in the remake. Beyond the power itself, Jason's presence in the trial feels unmistakably authentically Jason. For the most part, and nowhere is that more apparent than in his three Moris. When a survivor is pinned to the wall with a hook spike, Jason can give them a mini Mori if they're on their last hook stage, but if a survivor is on the ground with a spike in them, he gets a different mini Mori option instead. This on top of his regular Mori gives him the greatest number of Mori options of any killer in the game, and they all feel perfect for him. As far as Jason is concerned, the human body is made of Play-Doh to be stabbed, beaten, dismembered, and brutalised at his pleasure, and the Mori sell that beautifully. The hook spike just pulls your guts out all at once like a 90s special effect. I love it. There's no sense of realism because Jason doesn't really bother with that. When he's shoving the spike into a survivor's mouth, it doesn't have the realistic level of effort that it would take to drive a metal spike through the back of a human skull. But when you're as strong as Jason Voorhees, the laws of physics and biology become suggestions and give way to the rule of cool. It reminds me of when I talked about characters like Pinhead and Vecna, whose animations feel effortless as expressions of their otherworldly power, and Jason's Mori animations feel similarly effortless. Not because he's moving shit with his mind, but just because he's so strong and so single-mindedly ruthless that he doesn't even really feel like he's trying. This is exactly how Jason should feel, and in that respect, the transition to DBD is positively seamless. I wish I could say the same, however, about his first-person animations. Jason's first-person animations feel like they're lacking a little sauce. His kick feels disjointed, his pickup animation feels weird and wobbly, like about to fall over, and his first-person weapon wipe looks like something from 2016, just flailing his arm around like a toddler. This is presumably because he has several different weapon types in his skins. You could make him wipe his machete like Trapper, but that wouldn't make sense if he was carrying the axe weapon instead. So they shortcut with a generic, bland, flailing wipe that will work well for any weapon. I say well. This feels pretty lazy when you remember that Skull Merchant, one of behaviour's most neglected and undercooked killers on launch, still manages to have 3 different weapon wipe animations to accommodate her varying weapon designs through her skins. Her regular weapon has a swipe and she flicks the blade clean, her hydraulic blade extends from her arm and then fixes itself back, and her buzzsaw or axe head weapons spring out from the blade and she has to reload it back into position. You're telling me that they could give Skull Merchant 3 different weapon wipes, but couldn't spare one for Jason? Damn, if only you had a really talented animator who did some of the best character animations in DBD's history, like the Xenomorph. Oh wait, you did! But you laid them off a month or 2 ago. It would be pathetic if it wasn't so very, very funny. Much like most chapters in the last couple of years, I can't say I'm exactly sold on the killer perks either. Don't get me wrong, they are pretty thematic, especially with the 13s everywhere, but I think they lack a little bit of bite, and they seem really quite bad on Jason himself. So much like Springtrap and Krasu before him, his Adept is going to fucking suck. Hex Scared to Death might be a pretty decent perk if Vigil didn't exist, so this one's going into the Ravenous pile of perks that might see some play if there weren't 2 or 3 Vigils in every lobby for the rest of time. And Rampage is awkward? Any killer who can profitably use Hubris will also probably love this perk. So that's basically just Spirit then, I'm afraid. Unless you're a Spirit player out there in the big 2026, you're probably not using this perk. Silent Shadow is by a mile his strongest perk. It has serious potential on super mobile killers like Blight, Wesker and Karnaki in case these guys didn't have enough goodies. Especially because those killers tend to have a huge terror radius to warn you that they're coming. Pairing this with Lethal Pursuer will give you the freest first chase you could ever see in your life. Plus the permanent untouchable in the endgame might enable some no way out shenanigans on the right killer. Krasu, I'm looking at you. Sadly, Jason will not be one of the beneficiaries of this perk, however. His primary method of traversing the map efficiently already removes his terror radius, so Silent Shadow removing it won't do anything useful because you'll be using Omniscient Evil at the start of the match anyway. The same is true for a lot of killers who have map coverage tools that they want to use at the start of the game, like Springtrap, Xenomorph, Dracula, Dredge, and Wraith, obviously. The number of killers who want this is almost certainly lower than the number who want Lethal Pursuer, and if I'm honest, I think I'd rather run Secret Project and Corrupt over this than Lethal Pursuer, although there are definitely some killers who will love this perk. Again, Krasu, Spattered Handkerchief, Lorenza's Remains, No Way Out. Thank me later. Stop the press, they changed the fucking perk. Alright, sorry about this impromptu interruption. I only just realised just before we uploaded this that they actually changed what Silent Shadow does on the PTB, like in the PTB instance, which is pretty cool, actually. They don't do that very often. Now, instead of giving you stealth at the start of the match, it'll give you the stealth for 13 seconds whenever you get a hook, meaning it kind of feels like Furtive Chase. This definitely does make the perk stronger, but I don't think it increases the perk's utility on Jason, or makes it a perk you want to run on killers you weren't running it on before. Put it on Blight, Kaneki, Hillbilly with Apex Muffler is going to be nuts with it. Jason still isn't going to use it because he likes to move around undetectable anyway. Yeah, the perk is going to be better when it comes to live, but I don't think that's going to translate into killers that weren't going to run the old version running this new version. It'll just kind of be an option to replace Furtive Chase. Yeah. Sorry if you can hear the fan in the background, by the way. We are in the middle of a heat wave. It's 10 o'clock at night, and it's 30 degrees Celsius in here. And Cassie is actually, if you can turn the camera, she's actually right there on the sofa, because it's about the same temperature outside in this room as it is in her vivarium. So she's just enjoying the temperature right now a little bit more than I am. Yeah, sorry for the interruption. Let's go back to the actual video. I do have to give a point of praise to the skins, however. They're all original designs, but each of them clearly feature allusions to different eras of Friday the 13th, as Jason's design evolves throughout. The flannel shirt on the first skin is clearly a reference to Friday the 13th Part 2, where adult Jason makes his first appearance in a flannel shirt, although in the skin it's a red shirt with suspenders instead of a blue shirt with overalls. The second skin is meant to be an undead version of the first one, complete with a gravedigger's shovel, which is obviously an allusion to Jason Lives, my favourite instalment in the series where Jason comes back from the dead as a zombie. And the third skin, covered in chains and sea life, is a shout out to his look in New Blood and Jason Takes Manhattan, where he spends long periods of time trapped at the bottom of Crystal Lake, and he becomes a sodden aquatic revenant covered in rotten rusted chains as a result. For a chapter that feels, for want of a better term, muzzled by the legal nightmare surrounding Jason Voorhees and the Friday the 13th IP, I appreciate that these skins managed to be a satisfying remix of the existing looks from the movies, while still doing something new and opening the door for future cosmetics down the line. Am I the only one who can smell a blighted Jason in the future? I know the default design does have its critics, since it's the Jason Universe design used for products like Fortnite, and I understand the consternation about that. Some people think that Jason should be bulkier than this, a bit closer to how Kane Hodder looked playing the character, and it looks very clean for a guy who lives in the woods around Crystal Lake, and his only experience around a shower would be when he finds teenagers having sex in one. The only issue I really have is the mask's eye holes should be rounder, full circles, rather than the slanted eye shape that we have in the Universe design, and seemingly all of its skins too. But the rest of the Jason design looks great, and it'll look especially good when he gets the prestige blood on it and he gets a bit grimier. My personal favourite Jason design is the one from Freddy vs. Jason. He's not too big and beefy, the mask is fully rounded and fits over the front of his face, he's obviously undead but not too dead, it all just sort of works. And the Jason Universe design does owe a lot to Freddy vs. Jason and the remake, so I can't hate it too much. However, the place where this legal muzzle is most keenly felt isn't in what we got. It's in what we didn't get, because if you wanted Jason in the fog, this is a pretty great way to get him. But if you wanted a Friday the 13th chapter, I am so sorry, but you're out of luck. The absence of a Camp Crystal Lake map really stings. An abandoned summer camp is an iconic location in the world of slasher horror for a reason. Friday the 13th is that reason. And the fact that we haven't had one for the past decade of DBD suggested to me that it was being saved for Jason and a Camp Crystal Lake map, so not having it really doesn't feel good. Especially because 2 chapters in Year 10 didn't include new maps either. Even if we couldn't get a map for Crystal Lake itself, an original campground map set in an existing realm like Red Forest or Witherdale would have gone nicely. And I imagine that'll be a highly requested map for future releases now that we know Camp Crystal Lake isn't coming. The lack of a survivor is also a notable omission, but less important than that in my opinion. Most of the non-Jason characters in Friday the 13th series are very flat, more or less bags of blood and body parts for Jason to pop in a variety of fun ways. Tommy Jarvis is the only real exception, and the closest thing F-13 has to a recurring protagonist, so I guess if there was to be a survivor, it would be him. But he's not particularly important to the identity of Friday the 13th, so not having him isn't a huge deal, again in my opinion. One element I would have loved, though, is for Jason to hear his mother Pamela's voice talking to him throughout the trial, similar to Naughty Bear's personal narrator. Throughout the movies, Pamela's voice continues to ring through Jason's head, telling him to kill for Mother, even as her head is preserved in his shack. And Friday the 13th again played really hard into this angle, by having Pamela effectively being Jason's announcer, so it would have been, nice to have DBD's take on Jason doing something similar. Especially because most killers these days do have full voice acting, but Jason himself doesn't speak, so there is definitely room to have given Pamela the voice work for the chapter instead of him. We just haven't got it. I understand that this stuff was largely unavoidable due to the legal cat's cradle that is the Friday the 13th series, but that does not mean that absence is not still keenly felt for F-13 fans who wanted to see their favourite horror IP come to life in the fog with all the trimmings. I'm not a particularly fan of the Friday the 13th IP. You guys know I love writing and character and theme and all that good stuff. And Friday the 13th tends not to bother with that sort of thing so much. So my engagement with the series is a bit lukewarm. But I completely understand the frustration Friday the 13th fans might have with how this chapter has been handled. I guess that's the point of this entire video, really. If what you wanted in Dead by Daylight was the platonic idea of Jason, the big guy with the mask and the machete and the key, ma. Congratulations, you got it. Jason in Dead by Daylight almost completely expresses everything Jason should be. A blunt instrument of overwhelming force who applies that strength surprisingly creatively, solely to provide the audience with as much theatrical violence as possible. And thanks to his unique new lore and skins, he does feel like our Jason too. Like he's got DBD's grubby fingerprints all over him, and I kinda love that. But if you are a Friday the 13th fan from the movies or the game or whatever, and you wanted a Friday the 13th chapter, that's a whole different set of criteria. And sadly, this chapter does not pull that off. The absence of a Camp Crystal Lake map is the single most obvious omission, but the lack of add-ons that reference Pamela and not having her as a narrator or Tommy Jarvis as a survivor feels very conspicuous, and that sucks. DBD's story for Jason is wonderful and unique. It makes him feel like a part of this game that we know and love, but, it's not like they couldn't have had both if F-13's legal situation wasn't so fucked. Jason fighting the unknown in his DBD lore should not stop Pamela from appearing as an announcer for Jason, or a Camp Crystal Lake map, but unfortunately, thanks to Sean Cunningham and Victor Miller, it probably does. If this chapter is one you absolutely adore because Jason's finally here and who he is as a character is realised pretty well, I understand it. If this chapter is one that you hate because it's just not a Friday the 13th chapter, I understand that too. I am somewhere in the middle. I love what we have for the most part and enjoy a lot of elements like the power and the lore, but its limitations and shoddy animations do frustrate me, and I hope you eventually get the license for the Crystal Lake show eventually so that we can get a Camp Crystal Lake map and Pamela involved in DBD in a different way. I think I'm going to look back on this chapter pretty well over time, but if you don't, I completely get it. At least you've got the Grimoire to look forward to, because that is going to be a release to remember. Yeah, Cassie's not a big fan of Friday the 13th, are you, miss? No, you are not. Fucking Tom Savini. I'd never let that happen to you. Ever. Okay? Yeah.